There we are. All right, over to you, James.
Yep, thank you. Just give me one sec to share my screen. Alrighty, can we see this?
Yep.
Alrighty, cool. Yeah, just really quickly, there's someone I should thank who's not actually here, and that's James Hayes, because I completely forgot about this up until he sent me an email 3 hours ago saying he's not going to make it because I've been in Dubbo this week just for work. So I've rustled this together pretty quickly, and so hopefully I haven't missed too much out, and yeah, and hope you enjoy it. Do I still have you?
Yeah, you saw that.
Okay, cool, awesome. Okay, so scientific triples, it's been around a long time, and it's quite hard, and it's quite sort of reputed to be hard, but it's not impossible, and it's definitely like a good goal that anyone or like most ringers could really strive for. So just to start with, I'll just dive into a bit of history. It was created by a guy called John Carter, really long time ago in 1910, structured around group theory, separated the changes into 168 cosets. Don't really know what that means, but basically this guy had an idea to get 5,040 changes in a new way, and he came out with scientific triples. Unfortunately, it wasn't really rung for a really long time because he made a composition for it, but it just seemed really just a bit too hard for people to do, or it was just simply forgotten for other reasons, and the idea was left on the shelf for quite a long time. And then I believe in the 1950s, there was a letter to the ringing world basically asking the wider community why this had never been done, because it definitely, as I'll explain later, it's an idea that's very sort of abstract or like off the rails. And that's when A.J. Pitman came along, who composed a lot of other things, and he made a much easier composition that could be rung. And not long after that, they started ringing peals with it. Still very hard, but it was all of a sudden it was possible. And and so the first peal was in 1958. And and if you want to dive into the theory, which I'm not the right person to talk to about, there's a good link there about that. And so obviously it's as old as the Titanic. So hence the photo. So it's not really seen very much because it's a big challenge. There's no sort of argument about that. So as I said in the previous slide, the first peal was in 1958, and since then, so we're talking over 60 years, it's only been pealed 39 times, 37 of which were in tower and twice in hand. So we're talking like one every 2 years. So it's you really don't see it very much, and you'll soon see why. So Carter's original composition that he came up with, which was just too hard for such a long time, has only ever been rung 3 times. So it's hard. Well, Pitmans, most of those peals have been Pitmans or equivalent compositions, which were a lot more achievable. So in hand, it's been rung twice, once by the Birmingham crowd in 2008, which is quite recently really, and last year by Anzab in Sydney. And and Anzab altogether has rung 2 peals, one last year and one in 2003. So basically it breaks every rule you've ever learned. So it's almost like starting again if you want to take on this challenge of ringing this method. First of all, there's no treble bell, which, as a lot of people know, adds so much structure. It's like the control in an experiment. Without it, it really tears things apart and makes things quite just bit harder. The method is asymmetrical, and which basically means you need to know all the leads as individual leads. There are 3 types of call as opposed to 1, and none of them are at the lead end, which again, these are all things that pretty much you never do. And all of a sudden there's this method that just changes everything. And which is, yeah, basically why it's completely unstructured, and why when you're ringing it, it's so hard to stay right, because it's not like anything else. And if you do a wrong, it's pretty hard for someone else to put you right, and it's basically your responsibility to keep it right, keep it going. So yeah, so first thing, it's asymmetrical. So this is also the line as it is altogether. So the line itself, a plain course, isn't too bad. It doesn't really look like any of the other methods we ring, but you could learn this quite without too much difficulty and ring it, say at a practice night or even on a Sunday. And if this is as far as you ever got, like that's actually not so bad. So the leads are a bit longer than usual for triples. They're 30 changes long. So the plain course is 210 changes. But yeah, so unlike most other methods, it's asymmetrical. There's no flipping point or pivot bell or whatever you want to call it. So every single lead needs to be learned thoroughly. And basically the leads, some leads might look like they have a lot of hunting, but you really do quite need to know every lead exactly and where the plate spells are. Feel free to ask questions as well, or tell me to slow down if I'm going too fast. But yeah, so this is the first wrench spanner in the works. And then on to the next one, no treble bell. So as I sort of mentioned before, I mean, this sort of concept isn't completely unusual. I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with Stedman. Stedman doesn't have a treble bell either, but it is a very structured method when it comes to the sixes, which is why people can stay right or be put right without too much difficulty. While and the photo on the side definitely sort of is just a figure I stole from someone, which basically describes the quick and the slow six for Stedman, and it is very structured, which is why we ring it so much. And so without a treble bell, it's really hard to figure out where the lead end is. So even if someone was to tell you you're this place bell, it's you don't really know when you're going to get there, because there's just no real flags or signposts. And yeah, so that's the second difficulty, which makes it just a bit harder. And the thing that really pulls it apart are the bobs. Like the thing that really makes it tricky, and for good reason, is the fact that is the bobs. So the bobs, there are 3 bobs labeled A, B, and C. And again, this is a figure I've stolen from the ringing world. But so on the left-hand side of this image is a plain lead, and on the right-hand side, as if you can see my cursor, are the 3 bobs. So the A bob being here at the top, the B bob being here in the middle, and the C bob being here down the bottom. And really, really annoyingly, none of them actually occur at the lead end, which is all the way down here. So in pretty much all other methods, bobs and singles will always occur at the lead end, which again just helps sort of the structure, because as soon as the bob's over, you'll then be into a new lead, and you can just sort of forget about the previous lead, regardless of how the bob affected you. Well, in scientific, you not only have to make the bob, but you then have to finish off a lead before getting to the lead end, which again is just unprecedented. That just never really happens. The bobs themselves are the same, the same action, I should say, as in you have for all three positions, being that 2 bells will make a double dodge on the front, and another 2 bells will make thirds from the back, whilst the 3 bells at the back will be unaffected. But yeah, so they do happen in the same way, but just in different sections of the lead. And yeah. So exactly, that's, as I just sort of said, you still have the rest of the lead and to complete after the bob. Another interesting point is the fact that the bob takes place over 3 changes as opposed to 1. So pretty much a normal bob or the single is almost instantaneous, that you sort of flick tracks, is, as you might say, and you sort of change directions almost immediately, whilst this actually takes 3 changes, which might sound still like not a very long time, but it feels a lot longer when you're doing it. And it also makes you question about the bells around you, how they might be affected or not. But that might also be more of a sort of a handbell consideration. So that can be quite confusing, because again, you never really see that, like that just never really happens. Yeah, and so it's almost like when Carter came up with his method, he just came up with all these differences, and it's almost incredible, really. So yeah, it is entirely always your responsibility as to what your play spell is that you are at the start of a lead, and what you're becoming at the end of the lead, especially, you know, if a call has been made. Does this make sense to everybody? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't really make sense in the first place, but yeah. So in terms of strategy, I think people have different ways of getting to a call. I mean, I think it is possible to ring calls as they happen. So like in a normal method, you like someone called Bob, and pretty much almost immediately you'd make the bob or the single. How I found it and how we found it when we rang it last year was it was more useful to call it at the start of the lead, because basically, I guess for the best reason being that it gave you more time to think about it before it actually happened, because you had to sort of figure out which of the 3 it would be. So that gave us more time. And this table on the left was my strategy of learning the bobs. I know Tom and Dad had a slightly different sort of table of ideas, but it was along the same sort of line. So you have the 3 bob types on the left-hand side, A, B, and C. Fairly enough, we labeled them apple, banana, chocolate because they were A, B, C, but also because those 3 words were not only delicious, but they sounded very distinct, because we sort of felt like other people in the UK choose like the names red, green, and blue, but we sort of felt like having single syllable words, when you're focusing really, really hard, they might just, you just might not hear it properly, or like you just hear sort of a sound. Well, if you had words with multiple syllables, you would actually sort of process it in your head, because I mean, you're focusing really hard when it happens, and so you don't want to have to worry about what the actual call was. So they're the bobs on the left-hand side. So this table I created, and it basically shows you what play spell you'd be at the start of a lead, which is the before column, what you do if a bob was called in that lead, either making a double dodge up. Oh dear. Woo, sorry. Go this way. So everybody. Yeah, what you do in terms of work, so up being you'd be making the double dodge up, down being you'd be making double dodge down, and thirds being you'd make thirds from the back, and then the play spell you'd become. Now that seems like a lot to remember, because basically you'd get to the start of a lead, the conductor might say banana, which would be B, and you know you're the second place bell, and you know to make thirds, and then you become fifth place bell. And that is a lot. I mean, in terms of remembering 12 lines like that, it almost seems impossible. But there's sort of more to sort of figure out. So as you might see that these two swap with each other. So 4 becomes 1 and 1 becomes 4, and same with these two. So 6 becomes 3 and 3 becomes 6. So they're sort of perfect swaps. And that's true all the way down here. So 5 becomes 2, 2 becomes, and 5 becomes 2 the other way around. So knowing sort of this column thoroughly, I soon realized that you didn't really need to know what you were becoming, because it wasn't like a completely random bell. It wasn't like, 4 was going to become 7. It was basically sort of you're swapping pairs. So in learning that these bobs had 2 swapping pairs, you didn't really have to learn that column. And then in learning sort of this stringed line, in the order of up, thirds down, I just got so used to sort of this order 4 1 6 3 5 2 3 4 1 3 5 7 that I just didn't really need to know sort of what the work was either. So basically at the end, I mean, this is months of sort of practicing, but the only thing I ended up sort of really remembering was this column of sort of information. This column here at the lead end really did help with the C bobs. So the C bobs happened not at the lead end, but towards the end of the lead, that afterwards, all that was left for every single place bell was plain hunting. So one thing we also did to try and add a bit of structure was for the conductor to call out the lead end when the lead end happens, just to make sure that we're all in the right place. And that really helped with the C bobs, because once you'd made the bob, you could basically forget about the rest of the lead, because you could just hunt in whatever direction you're going, just continue hunting. And then the conductor would call out lead end, and then that was the place bell you were becoming. So that definitely helped on the early stages. And that's definitely, if anyone was ever to progress with this sort of little idea, I would strongly suggest get the conductor to call out lead end, because even when we had perfect leads, every single lead end, every single lead end after a bob, we would call lead end just to make sure that we'd got there right, because you're always, the overthinking is such a thing. Sometimes you doubt yourself, and actually knowing precisely where the lead end is in something so unstructured really, really does help a lot. And then, you then start worrying about the next time a call would be made. One great thing about scientific, or one great thing for one lucky ringer, is that one bell is observation. So pretty much always when this method is rung, whether it's tower and hand, basically the observation bell is the conductor, because they are basically unaffected for the whole peal. So it stands to reason that they need a job to do, so that they're given the role of conducting. And in our case, it was Esther, it was Mum, and she did a great job. And because it evens things out a bit more, and it would just be a little bit silly to make an inside bringer conduct, because you're not really testing the goal if you're going to be like an observation ringer who doesn't even get affected by the calls, because it really is the calls that sort of defines this method. Cool. Yeah. So definitely, I guess by the end of this slide, I guess my point is figure out a strategy. Like it could be very different to this, but make something work, like create your own little diagram that could really, really help you remember the bobs. And I guess one more thing about this is the fact that you had to learn sort of where the A bob was. Again, like it wasn't like the call was made exactly where the A bob happened. It happened right at the start of the lead. And the good thing about all of these pieces of work was that, or at least I think it was definitely the case with A's, and I think it was the case with B's, was the fact that with these place bells, that the first time it would be possible to make this work was when that bob would happen. So for instance, the treble, or the first place bell, I should say, is the first thing it does is makes fifths, and then it would usually make a point on the front. But the only place in that at the beginning of the lead that they could make thirds is just after it makes fifths, and then to make thirds, and then to sort of go back. So you definitely get used to the fact that these pieces of work can only occur at particular parts of the lead. You know, you can't do double dodge down on the front when you're, you know, at the back of the lead. You can only do that at the front. And so in terms of placing when the bob occurs, because nothing's being said when the bob itself happens, that's actually not that hard. Yeah, but I mean, with our experience, we definitely had a few tense bob leads where, you know, the bob was called at the start of the lead, and you just really wanted to get to that part where Esther would then say lead end, and then just like sigh of relief, and hopefully no one had swapped their bells or anything like that.
Question, just sorry, while you're
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, Peter.
So you said, that you make the bobs at the start of the lead. So you could have, in theory, an A bob and a B bob and a C bob in the same lead.
In theory, yes. So the great thing about Pitmans is that never happens.
Okay.
The difficulty of Carter's is the fact that did happen. So that was just, you know, this, I hope I've already sort of said so far that this is incredibly hard, but Carter's just made it another level of hardness,
Okay.
almost unnecessarily, which is why I didn't get rung for so long.
Okay.
But yeah, that's a very good point. And yeah. Cool. Is anything else? Again, I hope I'm not rushing or anything like that. On to the next thing. Still have bloody singles. So it's almost, you just can't run away from singles in triples. As a learning tool, we learnt a Roger Bailey single. We called it a Roger Bailey single because Roger Bailey came up with it. Where basically the front four bells all make a place and all of the bells at the back will be unaffected. And it was really good because we learned this before we learned the bobs. So the first thing we did was learn the plain course. That was like the first goal, and that, you know, took a little while. And then the first time we started doing touches was using a Roger Bailey single, which, I mean, people argue about the sort of validity of it because, you know, it wasn't sort of Carter's original idea, blah, 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 like that. But it was really good to sort of, it helped you get your first quarter peal. And that's how we got our first quarter peal, using a Roger Bailey single. So basically it was just one type of call and you could get 1250 or whatever we rang, that was, you know, another goal to be able to ring the quarter peal. And I think that's a completely valid step. And whether or not you want to ring peals with Roger Bailey singles, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But that aside, even with all the normal compositions, whether it's Pitmans or Carter's or anything, there are still regular singles. And I'm not too sure why, but I'm sure some composer whiz could explain why there must always be singles, but there just has to be. There's just two. And we basically learned them. We just sort of rang, I think it was like there were calls apart or something. We just practiced that because it was just so separate, and it was just another layer of learning that we just didn't want to do. So we just sort of forced it, and we just learned it. And I seem to remember that. So yeah, so it was basically the front four bells. It was the same as a bob, and which I seem to remember it was Tom and me doing all four of those bells, and then 5 and 6 make a place. And then 7th place, which was Mum, was unaffected. So only Dad in that instance was affected at the single in the whole peal, but it's yeah, it just had to happen for whatever reason. And so yeah, basically those singles affect 6 bells, which is quite a lot for a single, really. Yeah, so they're all the chords, bobs and singles. Hope it hasn't sort of made you go a bit loopy just thinking about it. But yeah, so I guess at the end of the day, it's a very tall order, and I guess it's reputable because it's a tall order, but it is possible. Like, I mean, people have done it in the past, and people will continue to do it in the future. And I guess the biggest sort of point to take away, I mean, like, you might just be fascinated in this idea, but if you, well, you know, you just wanted to hear this sort of story or this breakdown, but if you really wanted to ring it, you really have to break it down into bite-sized chunks. Because if you look at the big picture too much, you're always going to think it's just impossible. But yeah, and so I would say be able to ring a plain course. Genuinely, there would be like heaps of ringers in Sydney that could easily do that. And that's goal number 1. You could easily do that. And what's good about that is like the plain course is 210 changes long. So it's quite lengthy. And so I don't know, if you had sort of a 10-minute slot that you wanted to ring, maybe a plain course of scientific triples could fit, providing all your ringers knew how to ring it just for a plain course. And then, yeah, learn the Roger Bailey singles. Ring a quarter peal. Like, even just ringing a quarter peal scientific is reputable. Like, people will look at that and be like, wow, like, you know, I can't do that. Or like, it's hard. Like, it's even there, like, it's tricky. And then learn the bobs. And the thing is, you can learn touches of the bobs, and I'm pretty sure you could ring quarter peals where you didn't have to ring all 3 bobs. You could ring like 1 or 2. You could definitely ring touches with just 1, which we definitely did a lot of. But when it comes to the peal, all compositions have to have all 3 bobs, and there's just no way of escaping it. But yeah, and then ring the quarter peal with all 3 bobs, and then eventually ring that peal. But again, like, you know, we're not all into ringing peals. But I guess that's why it was created in the first place, because it was like a brand new way to get to 5,040 changes, which is the magic number on 7 bells. Yeah, and so yeah, if there's a will, there's a way. It's definitely a great sense of feeling when you achieve it. We attempted the peal itself. I'm not sure. It was a lot. Like, it was a lot, and it really keeps you on your toes. You really, because you're thinking about so many things. It doesn't feel like you're ringing for as long as you do. You're basically concentrating, and then all of a sudden they say that's all and that's it. And the reality is, you will make 1,000 mistakes getting this right. There's no way around that. Like, no one, even the best ringer ever, would have learned this without making some mistake somewhere. It's a bit of a lengthy project, but it's achievable. And, you know, like, Anzab has done it twice, and I think we've got the resources if anyone ever wanted to do it. And that's sort of it. That's a bit of a thanks. I mean, I didn't really dive into my personal experiences too much, but I think everyone sort of read that article and sort of also sort of got a glimpse of what it was like. But yeah, so that's everything I sort of prepared in this final hour. And yeah, is there any questions or anything like that?
I had a question. Where did the idea come from?
As in, like for me, like us doing it?
Yeah,
or...
for you guys, for your attempt.
So I guess I mean, it was the first lockdown. I mean, I was still at home, and Tom wasn't too far away. I mean, he'd already moved out. So I think we'd already been ringing a fair bit of handbells, because there was like nothing else to do. You couldn't really go anywhere. And I mean, I remember being out of work for a while, because, you know, we all were. And it just sort of, I couldn't give you an exact time, but I remember like Dad always used to talk about it, because I mean, he had rung it in the past, and Mum had rung it in the past. And I remember we had all these little projects with like surprise major and stuff. And sometimes, like, when you always ring the same similar things, you sort of, it gets a bit stale. And I definitely remember suggesting, oh, why don't we just sort of see if we can do a plain course, and yeah, and it was different, and we just sort of thought, oh, that's a bit crazy, but let's just see what happens, and yeah, and then we did. We learned the playing course, and then it just sort of happened. And then it was me, when we'd rung the playing course, who then started sort of really driving at the others to try and push things along, be like, let's see how much more we could do, because there was a little bit of argument, but I mean, we got there eventually. But it took sort of 3 or 4 months, and I guess a pandemic to make sure that we sort of focused on it. So I guess not that you should thank COVID for anything, but yeah, so that's sort of where the idea came from. Yeah, it was definitely, it was a relief to finish, really. But I guess you could say that about a lot of peels.
Yeah, it feels good when you stop.
Yeah, pretty much.
I just
Yeah,
realized
no.
it was almost a year ago.
I know, which is
last week
crazy, because
that it happened.
I mean, just thinking back to this year, I mean, I don't even know what I've done. Like, this year's been almost like a whitewash. I mean, just a washout, sorry. But yeah, I mean, I don't even know what I've done since then. But it was, yeah, it was good times. And yeah, I mean, for instance, I'd love to do it in Tower. I could put that out there as a nice little goal we could do, because I'm sure we could find 8 people who could do it. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But yeah, I don't know. I think, Dad, I don't know if you have anything else to say, because I mean, you probably know a bit more of the technical side of things, or the history. I don't know.
Oh, not particularly. I mean, there was just a technical point, like you said, you've got to have, if you're ringing the bobs in a peal, you've got to have the same number of the 3 types of bobs. That's a technical requirement.
Oh yeah.
So you can't sort of say we'll only have the apple bobs or anything. The only way you can actually get a true peal is to have the equal number of the 3. I imagine people like Pitman and Carter would have been aware that Roger Bailey single would do the job, but I don't think they would have been satisfied, because in those days, peals or triples had a minimum number of singles, which in this case is 2, and you can't get away without 2. But the Roger Bailey single certainly was very useful as a learning tool for us, wasn't it? As a stepping stone, rather.
Yeah, definitely.
And it'd be good achievement for anyone to ring it anyway. I mean, it's not, if you look at that line, it's not impossible. There's a lot of plain hunting in it. It's just a matter of remembering the little bits that aren't plain hunting in the right order and executing them. And the few times I have been lucky enough to ring it, we have, although we say there isn't a lead, that's how any mistakes have been put right, is that everyone works from lead end to lead end. James mentioned about the lead end. Well, if you can get everybody right at the lead end, then you can carry on. And so there are leads, essentially. There are divisions, at least, which there's no treble defining them, but they are defined in the method, and everyone treats them as the division ends. And that's the place, if you're going to have a chance to get right, that's where it is. And although James said we made thousands of mistakes, in fact, by the time we were ringing the peal, it was really very good, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, no, I was definitely referring to like the learning process. You make a
Yeah,
thousand.
there was certainly a lot of that. And the boys were very patient with us older people.
Yeah, well, what happens when if you teach your kids how to ring?
Well, that's right. They overtake.
But yeah, but thanks all. I hope
Yeah, no, thanks, James. That was very interesting.
Bit of a story.
I didn't really know much about scientific triples before, and now I do. Not sure I want to ring it, but it blows your mind a bit. I should have given you more notice about the.
No. I'm sorry. It almost like worries me, the thought that I would have totally forgotten, and because James he sent a really apologetic email, and I'm just like, oh my god, like this is like my guardian angel, and he doesn't even know why. So yeah, so I think he might watch the recording later or something.
Yeah, it'll be on YouTube. So we'll
Yeah.
put it on there. Okay.
Well,
Well,
yeah,
thanks,
thanks
James. And I was going to thank Chris, but he's already disappeared.
Thank you, Richard.
So yes, that's it.